The air in the Los Angeles studio was thick with anticipation as the cameras rolled. Judge Judy Shineland, a towering figure in television for over 2 decades, stared down at Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett with the intensity of a seasoned predator. At 81, Judge Judy had seen it all, or so she thought. Her sharp tongue and no-nonsense demeanor had made her a household name, her show a cultural institution. She'd built her empire on cutting through lies, silencing excuses, and demanding respect. Today, she was ready to put this young congresswoman in her place. Jasmine Crockett, however, was no ordinary opponent. At 42, she was a rising star in Congress, known for her fearless questioning of powerful figures. A former civil rights attorney, she had earned her seat through grit, intelligence, and an unyielding commitment to justice. Her presence in Judge Judy's courtroom was no accident. This special episode was billed as a discussion on congressional ethics and public service. But from the moment Judge Judy opened her mouth, it was clear this would be no polite debate. Congresswoman Crockett, Judge Judy began, her voice dripping with disdain, "I've been watching your performance in Congress, and I have to say, I'm not impressed." The audience shifted uncomfortably. This was more personal than anyone had expected. "You seem to think that being loud and confrontational makes you effective. But what I see is a young woman who doesn't understand how to show proper respect to her elders and betters." Crockett's expression remained neutral, but those who knew her could see the slight tightening around her eyes. Judge Judy had just made her first mistake, questioning Crockett's intelligence and respect. "Your Honor," Crockett replied evenly, "I'd be happy to discuss my congressional record with you. I think you might be surprised by what I've actually accomplished." But Judge Judy wasn't interested in a discussion. She was here to deliver one of her famous verbal beatdowns. "Don't you honor me in that tone," she snapped, her voice rising. "I've been practicing law since before you were born. I've seen hundreds of lawyers who think they're smarter than everyone else, and they all have one thing in common. They're usually wrong." The tension in the courtroom ratcheted up several notches. Judge Judy was clearly trying to establish dominance through age and experience. "You want to talk about accomplishments?" she continued. "I've been on television for over 20 years, making more money than most politicians could dream of, because I know how to handle people like you." Crockett leaned forward slightly, her voice remaining calm but gaining an edge. "Your Honor, I'm not sure what you mean by people like me. Could you clarify that?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Judge Judy had walked into potentially problematic territory, and everyone in the courtroom could feel it. Judge Judy, perhaps realizing her mistake, pivoted to a different attack. "What I mean is politicians who think they can come into established institutions and change everything without paying their dues. You've been in Congress for, what, a few years? And you think you can lecture Supreme Court justices and federal judges?" This was the moment Crockett had been waiting for. Judge Judy had just revealed that she fundamentally misunderstood Crockett's role. "Your Honor," Crockett said, her voice now carrying the authority she'd developed through years of courtroom practice, "I think there might be some confusion about how our constitutional system works." The audience could sense that something was shifting. Crockett wasn't backing down. She was positioning for a counterattack. Judge Judy, apparently thinking she was winning, pressed harder. "Don't lecture me about the Constitution, young lady," she said, her voice taking on the tone that had made her famous. "I've been interpreting law longer than you've been alive. The problem with your generation is that you think you know everything, but you don't understand respect for institutions." She pointed directly at Crockett. "You want to know what I think? I think you're a showboat who uses inflammatory rhetoric to get attention. Real lawyers handle their business quietly and professionally." What Judge Judy didn't realize was that she had just walked into a perfectly laid trap. By questioning Crockett's ethics and suggesting she was unprofessional, Judge Judy had opened the door for Crockett to demonstrate exactly how prepared and professional she was. Crockett sat back in her chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Those who had watched her dismantle opponents in congressional hearings recognized the expression immediately. "Your Honor," she said, pulling out a folder that her legal team had prepared, since you question my understanding of constitutional principles, I think this might be a good time to review some facts. Judge Judy raised an eyebrow, still confident in her position. What fact could you possibly have that would be relevant here? Crockett opened her folder with deliberate care. Well, she said, let's start with something you said a moment ago about respecting institutions and handling business quietly. The courtroom was completely silent now. Everyone could feel that Crockett was building towards something significant. You mentioned that you've been interpreting law for decades, which is true. But I think the audience might be interested in how you've actually handled some of your most famous cases. Judge Judy's confident expression flickered for just a moment. She wasn't used to being the one under scrutiny. Crockett pulled out a series of documents from her folder. Your Honor, I've taken the liberty of reviewing some of your most publicized decisions from your time as a family court judge before your television career. This was unexpected. Nobody had ever brought Judge Judy's actual judicial record into question on her own show. What are you doing? Judge Judy demanded, but her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. I'm demonstrating the difference between television performance and actual legal analysis, Crockett replied calmly. Since you questioned my qualifications, I thought it might be helpful to examine yours. The audience was riveted. This had gone far beyond a typical Judge Judy episode. This was turning into a real legal confrontation between two accomplished attorneys. Crockett held up the first document. This is from a case where you ruled against a single mother seeking child support. Your reasoning was that she should have made better choices rather than relying on the court system. Judge Judy's face was starting to flush. That case was decided correctly based on the facts presented. Perhaps, Crockett continued, but here's what's interesting. A few years later, the appellate court overturned your decision, noting that your reasoning showed insufficient consideration of the legal standards and inappropriate personal judgment. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Judy was being fact-checked in real time, and she clearly hadn't expected it. What happened next marked the moment when the entire dynamic of the confrontation changed. Judge Judy, clearly rattled by having her judicial record questioned, made a critical error. How dare you come into my courtroom and question my judicial record, she shouted, standing up from her bench. I don't care what some appellate court said years later. I know how to run a courtroom. But Crockett was just getting started. Your Honor, this actually brings up an important point. This isn't really your courtroom, is it? The question hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. What did you say? Judge Judy demanded. Crockett stood up, her full legal training now on display. I said, this isn't really your courtroom. This is a television set. You're not actually a sitting judge anymore. You're a television personality who arbitrates disputes for entertainment purposes. The audience gasped. Someone had just explained to Judge Judy exactly what her show actually was, and she clearly didn't like it. The authority you're claiming to have over me as a congresswoman is imaginary, Crockett continued. I'm an elected federal official. You're a retired judge who now works in television. Our roles in the actual legal and political system are quite different. Judge Judy was speechless. For the first time in her television career, someone had systematically dismantled her authority while remaining completely professional and factual. The stage was now set for what would become the most memorable moment in either of their careers. Crockett remained standing, her voice calm, but carrying the authority she'd earned through years of constitutional law practice. Your Honor, since you brought up respect for institutions, let me explain how our constitutional system actually works. She opened her folder to another set of documents. As a member of Congress, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. That oath requires me to provide oversight of the executive and judicial branches, including questioning Supreme Court justices about their ethics and conduct. Judge Judy tried to interrupt, but Crockett continued with the precision of a seasoned litigator. You called this grandstanding, but the Constitution specifically gives Congress the power and responsibility to investigate and oversee the other branches of government. It's called checks and balances, and it's fundamental to our democracy. Crockett pulled out a copy of the Constitution itself. Article 1. Section 1 gives Congress legislative power. Article 1. Section 8 gives Congress the power to regulate courts, including the Supreme Court. When I question judicial ethics, I'm not being disrespectful. I'm doing exactly what the founders intended. The audience was completely absorbed. This wasn't just a personal confrontation anymore. It was a real-time civics lesson from someone who clearly knew what she was talking about. Your Honor, you said that I don't understand respect for institutions. But, respectfully, I think you might not understand what my institutional role actually requires. Crockett wasn't finished. She pulled out another document that would prove to be the decisive moment. You mentioned that real lawyers handle their business quietly and professionally. That's an interesting perspective, but it's not supported by legal precedent. She held up a Supreme Court case. In McGrain v. Doherty, the Supreme Court held that Congress has not only the right, but the duty to investigate and expose wrongdoing in government. The court specifically said that Congress's oversight function is essential to informed lawmaking. Judge Judy was staring at Crockett with a mixture of shock and grudging respect. She clearly hadn't expected to be schooled by a young politician. So, when I questioned Supreme Court justices about undisclosed gifts and ethical violations, Crockett continued, I'm not grandstanding. I'm fulfilling my constitutional duty, as defined by the Supreme Court itself. Then Crockett shifted from constitutional law to personal credentials, and her voice took on a more pointed edge. Your Honor, you questioned my qualifications earlier. Let me clarify something for you and the audience. She pulled out her resume. I graduated from a top law school. I spent over a decade as a civil rights attorney, winning cases in federal court that protected people's constitutional rights. I was elected to a state legislature where I passed significant legislation. Then I was elected to Congress, where I serve on a key judiciary committee. The contrast with Judge Judy's television career was becoming stark. My qualifications to discuss constitutional law aren't based on television ratings or entertainment value. They're based on education, experience, and the trust of voters who sent me to Congress. What came next was delivered with surgical precision. You said I don't understand respect for institutions, Your Honor. But I think what you really mean is that you expect deference to authority figures, regardless of whether that authority is earned or appropriate. Crockett's voice remained respectful but firm. I have tremendous respect for legitimate institutional authority. I respect federal judges who follow ethics rules. I respect Supreme Court justices who demonstrate judicial temperament. I respect television personalities who stay in their lane. The implication was clear, and the audience understood it immediately. But Crockett wasn't done. She delivered what would become the most quoted part of her response. You criticize my generation for thinking we know everything. But, Your Honor, we don't think we know everything. We think we know enough to ask the right questions of the right people at the right time. She gestured to the courtroom around them. You built your career on holding people accountable, on demanding that they answer for their actions. How is what I do in Congress any different? The parallel was devastating. Judge Judy had spent decades grilling people on television, but when someone applied the same scrutiny to institutions she respected, she called it disrespectful. The difference, Crockett continued, is that when I ask tough questions, it's the Supreme Court justices who have lifetime tenure and make decisions affecting millions of Americans. When you ask tough questions, it's to people fighting over security deposits and fender benders. Crockett sat down, but she wasn't finished. Your Honor, you said earlier that you've been making more money than most politicians could dream of. That's probably true. But money isn't how we measure success in public service. She leaned forward, her voice carrying the weight of genuine conviction. I could have stayed in private practice and made more money. I could have taken a corporate law job and made more money. But I chose public service because some things are more important than money. The courtroom was completely silent. Even Judge Judy seemed to recognize that something significant was happening. So, when you question my qualifications or my methods, Your Honor, I want you to understand something. I'm not here for the money, the fame, or the television ratings. I'm here because the Constitution requires Congress to provide oversight, and I take that responsibility seriously. For perhaps the first time in her television career, Judge Judy was genuinely speechless. She sat back in her chair, looking at Crockett with an expression that mixed surprise, respect, and maybe even admiration. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost all its earlier aggression. "Congresswoman," that was quite a response. The admission was barely audible, but everyone in the courtroom heard it. Judge Judy, the woman who had made a career of having the last word, had just been out-argued by someone half her age. "I think," Judge Judy continued slowly, "I may have underestimated you." Crockett smiled slightly. "Your Honor, that's been happening to me my whole career. I'm used to it." The courtroom erupted. The audience, many of whom had come expecting to see Jasmine Crockett get the traditional Judge Judy treatment, instead witnessed something unprecedented. They had just watched a constitutional lawyer systematically dismantle one of television's most formidable personalities while remaining completely professional and respectful. People were on their feet, applauding. Others were recording on their phones, knowing they'd witnessed something historic. This wasn't just good television. It was a masterclass in how to handle authority figures who overreach. The Los Angeles studio buzzed with energy as the cameras stopped rolling, but the real drama was just beginning. Judge Judy Shineland, still seated at her bench, looked uncharacteristically subdued. Her usual commanding presence seemed softened, almost reflective, as she processed the verbal sparring match that had just unfolded. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, on the other hand, stood tall, her calm demeanor unshaken, her folder of meticulously prepared documents still in hand. The audience, a mix of stunned onlookers and enthusiastic supporters, continued to murmur, their applause lingering in the air like an echo of the historic moment they'd just witnessed. Behind the scenes, Judge Judy's production team was already scrambling. They knew they had captured something extraordinary. Television gold that would dominate headlines and social media feeds. Producers huddled in the control room, debating how to edit the episode to preserve their star's reputation while capitalizing on the undeniable star power of Crockett's performance. "This is going to break the internet," one producer whispered, eyes wide. "But we need to be careful. Judy's never been upstaged like this." As Crockett exited the set, her team greeted her with quiet pride. Her chief of staff, a seasoned political operative named Marcus Tate, handed her a bottle of water. "You just rewrote the playbook, Congresswoman," he said, a grin spreading across his face. That was surgical. Crockett allowed herself a small smile, but stayed focused. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," she replied. "The real work starts now." Within minutes, audience members who had been in the courtroom began sharing snippets of what they'd seen on their phones. Clips of Crockett's measured takedown, her constitutional expertise, and Judge Judy's stunned silence spread like wildfire across social media. Hashtags like Crockett versus Judy and Constitutional Smackdown started trending within the hour. One viral post read, "Jasmine Crockett just turned Judge Judy's courtroom into a civics classroom. Masterclass." Another showed a freeze frame of Judge Judy's shocked expression with the caption, "When you try to school a congresswoman, but she's got the Constitution in her back pocket." The show wouldn't air for weeks, but the leaked clips were enough to spark a cultural phenomenon. Legal scholars, political commentators, and everyday viewers weighed in, dissecting every moment of the confrontation. Constitutional law professor Elena Vasquez tweeted, "Crockett's defense of congressional oversight was textbook perfect. This is how you challenge authority with facts, not feelings." Meanwhile, a popular meme circulated showing Crockett holding her folder, captioned, "When you come prepared and your opponent doesn't." Back in her dressing room, Judge Judy sat with her longtime producer, Clara Hensley, who had been with the show since its inception. The room was quiet, the weight of the moment settling over them. "I didn't see that coming," Judge Judy admitted, her voice softer than usual. "She's sharp, really sharp." Clara nodded, choosing her words carefully. "She's a force, Judy, but you handled it with grace at the end. That apology, it's going to resonate. People will respect you for it." Judge Judy sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't apologize often, Clara, but she earned it. I misjudged her. and she made me pay for it. The apology Clara referred to had come during the closing credits, a moment that stunned the audience almost as much as Crockett's arguments. Congresswoman Crockett, Judge Judy had said, her tone measured but sincere, "I want to apologize. I came into this thinking I knew who you were and what you represented. I was wrong." For a woman who had built her career on never backing down, it was an unprecedented admission. It humanized her in a way few had seen before, and it set the stage for a surprising shift in her public persona. The production team decided to lean into the moment, ensuring the apology would be prominently featured in the episode. They also reached out to Crockett's team to propose a follow-up appearance, hoping to capitalize on the buzz. Marcus Tate, fielding the request, was non-committal. "We'll consider it," he said diplomatically. But the Congresswoman's focus is on her work in Washington, not TV ratings. For Jasmine Crockett, the confrontation was a turning point. She returned to Washington, where her colleagues in Congress were already buzzing about the leaked clips. Senior Democrats, including the House Judiciary Committee Chair, Samuel Langford, pulled her aside during a closed-door meeting. "Jasmine, that was extraordinary," Langford said, his voice warm with admiration. "You didn't just defend yourself, you defended the integrity of Congress. We need more of that." The House Speaker issued a public statement praising Crockett's performance. Congresswoman Crockett exemplified the knowledge and professionalism we expect from our elected officials. Her defense of constitutional principles was a model for all public servants. Even a few Republicans, like Judiciary Committee member Daniel Pierce, offered grudging praise. "I don't agree with her politics," Pierce told a reporter, "but she knows her stuff." That was impressive. Crockett's office was inundated with requests for interviews, speaking engagements, and guest appearances on major news programs. Networks like CNN and MSNBC clamored to book her, not as a controversial figure, but as a constitutional scholar who could break down complex legal concepts for a broad audience. She accepted a few invitations, including a Sunday talk show where she expanded on her argument about congressional oversight. "The Constitution isn't just a document," she said, her voice steady and authoritative. "It's a living framework that demands accountability from every branch of government. That's my job, and I take it seriously." Her performance resonated beyond politics. Law schools across the country, including prestigious institutions like Yale and Georgetown, reached out to request permission to use clips of the confrontation in their constitutional law courses. Professor Vasquez, who had tweeted about the exchange, emailed Crockett personally. "Your argument was a masterclass in how to assert institutional authority without losing professionalism. I'm showing this to my students next semester." The American Bar Association shared a clip of Crockett's explanation of checks and balances, commenting, "This is why legal education and civic engagement matter." High school civics teachers began incorporating the confrontation into their lesson plans, using it to illustrate the separation of powers and the role of Congress in holding other branches accountable. One teacher in Chicago posted a video of her students reenacting the exchange, with a teenager playing Crockett delivering the line, "This isn't really your courtroom, is it?" to thunderous classroom applause. The confrontation wasn't just a television moment. It was a cultural watershed. For decades, Judge Judy had embodied unquestioned authority, the stern elder who could shut down any challenge with a sharp quip or a withering glare. Crockett's response offered a new model, respectful but relentless pushback against authority that oversteps its bounds. She hadn't raised her voice or resorted to personal attacks. Instead, she'd used facts, precedent, and constitutional principles to dismantle Judge Judy's claims. Cultural commentators noted the generational and racial dynamics at play. A young black woman had out-argued one of America's most iconic authority figures, not through bravado, but through superior preparation and knowledge. "This is what leadership looks like in the new era," wrote columnist Aisha Brooks in a widely shared op-ed. Crockett didn't just defend herself. She defended the principles that make accountability possible in a democracy. The exchange also sparked broader conversations about civic education. Many commentators pointed out that Crockett's ability to explain constitutional principles in clear, accessible terms highlighted how poorly most Americans understood their own government. A viral thread by a political science professor broke down Crockett's arguments, concluding, "If more public figures could articulate the Constitution like this, we'd have a more informed electorate." Politically, Crockett's star was ascendant. Democratic leadership began consulting her on high-level strategy, recognizing her ability to communicate complex ideas effectively. Committee chairs sought her input on constitutional questions, and she was invited to join a task force on judicial ethics, a direct nod to her defense of congressional oversight. Her book deal, already in the works, saw its value skyrocket as publishers realized she could appeal to both legal scholars and general readers. Even some conservative commentators, while disagreeing with her politics, acknowledged her skill. "Crockett's a liberal, no question," wrote pundit Nathan Caldwell in a conservative outlet. "But she's the kind of opponent you respect. She came prepared, and she didn't back down." More politicians should take notes. For Judge Judy, the aftermath was more complex. The confrontation didn't diminish her status as a television icon, but it did expose the limitations of her persona when faced with genuine expertise. Some critics argued that her reliance on intimidation and bluster had been no match for Crockett's substantive knowledge. Others, however, praised her for her rare moment of humility. Judge Judy could have doubled down, wrote entertainment reporter Lila Chun. Instead, she showed she's secure enough to admit when she's wrong. That's rare in this business. Judge Judy herself leaned into the narrative of respect. In a rare interview after the episode's taping, she spoke candidly about the encounter. "Congresswoman Crockett is a formidable woman," she said. "I underestimated her, and she proved me wrong. That's the kind of thing I respect, someone who can back up their talk with real substance." Her fans rallied around her, appreciating her graciousness. Social media posts from longtime viewers read, "Judy's still the queen, but she showed class by giving Crockett her due." The episode, when it finally aired, drew record ratings, with viewers tuning in to see the clash they'd already heard about through viral clips. The confrontation between Crockett and Judge Judy became more than a television event. It was a teaching moment for the country. It demonstrated that preparation could trump intimidation, that respect and accountability could coexist, and that constitutional knowledge still mattered in public discourse. Crockett's approach inspired a new generation of leaders, particularly young women and people of color, who saw in her a model of how to challenge authority without losing dignity. Political strategists began studying the exchange as a blueprint for handling authority figures. Crockett had shown that you could be respectful and devastating, professional and powerful, all at once. Her performance shifted how political media covered congressional figures, with outlets paying more attention to substantive expertise rather than just viral moments. Crockett proved that intelligence can be just as compelling as drama, wrote media critic Jamal Reed. That's a lesson the media and the public should take to heart. As the weeks passed, the confrontation continued to reverberate. Crockett's office received letters from students, teachers, and lawyers thanking her for her clarity and courage. One letter from a high school girl in Texas read, "I want to be a lawyer because of you. You showed me I don't have to be loud to be strong." Crockett kept that letter on her desk, a reminder of why she'd chosen public service. Meanwhile, Judge Judy's team prepared for the episode's airing, knowing it would redefine her legacy in unexpected ways. The confrontation had shown her vulnerabilities, but it had also highlighted her ability to evolve. "Judy's been at this for decades," Clara Hensley told a colleague. "She's not going anywhere, but she's smart enough to know when someone's earned their moment." The stage was set for the long-term impact of this clash to unfold, as both women navigated their newfound roles in the public eye. Crockett's star was rising, her influence growing, while Judge Judy faced the challenge of adapting her persona to a world that valued expertise as much as authority. What would happen next would shape not only their careers, but the broader conversation about power, respect, and accountability in America. When the episode finally aired, the anticipation had reached a fever pitch. Social media had been buzzing for weeks with leaked clips and heated discussions about the clash between Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and Judge Judy Shineland. The Los Angeles studio, once a stage for small claims disputes, had become the epicenter of a cultural and political moment. Viewers across the country tuned in, eager to see the confrontation that had already been dubbed the constitutional takedown by commentators. The ratings were astronomical, surpassing even Judge Judy's most iconic episodes, as millions watched to see if the hype matched the reality. The broadcast didn't disappoint. The editors had preserved every pivotal moment. Crockett's calm, precise dismantling of Judge Judy's authority, the stunned silence of the audience, and Judge Judy's rare apology. The closing credits, where Judge Judy acknowledged her misjudgment, became one of the most replayed moments in television history. "Congresswoman Crockett, I was wrong," she said, her voice steady but softer than usual. The admission, paired with Crockett's gracious response, "Your Honor, that's been happening to me my whole career. I'm used to it," struck a chord with viewers. It was a rare glimpse of humility from a television titan and a testament to Crockett's ability to command respect without demanding it. Social media exploded as the episode aired. Hashtags like Crockett wins and Judy meets her match trended globally, with memes and reaction videos flooding every platform. One viral clip showed Crockett holding up the Constitution, captioned, "When you bring receipts and the law." Another meme juxtaposed Judge Judy's shocked expression with the text, "When you realize you're not the only one who can throw shade." Legal Twitter, in particular, was ablaze with attorneys and scholars praising Crockett's mastery of constitutional law. "This is what happens when you underestimate a civil rights attorney," tweeted a prominent law professor. Crockett didn't just win, she taught us all something. For Jasmine Crockett, the episode was a catapult. Her office in Washington was flooded with invitations, speaking engagements at universities, keynote addresses at legal conferences, and guest spots on every major news outlet. She became a sought-after voice on issues of judicial ethics and congressional oversight. Her name synonymous with principled leadership. Democratic leaders, recognizing her star power, began positioning her for more prominent roles. "Jasmine's not just a congresswoman anymore," said Marcus Tate, her chief of staff, to a colleague. "She's a movement." Crockett's appearance on a Sunday talk show cemented her status as a national figure. When asked about the confrontation, she didn't gloat. Instead, she used the platform to double down on her message. "This isn't about me versus Judge Judy," she said, her voice steady and earnest. "This is about making sure our institutions work the way they're supposed to. Congress has a duty to hold power accountable, whether it's a federal judge, a Supreme Court justice, or anyone else. That's what I was elected to do." Her ability to pivot from a personal victory to a broader call for civic responsibility won her admiration across the political spectrum. Her influence extended beyond politics. Law schools incorporated the confrontation into their curricula, using it to teach students how to argue effectively under pressure. A professor at Stanford Law tweeted, "Crockett's performance is a case study in how to challenge authority with facts and professionalism. My students will be studying this for years." High school civics classes across the country played clips of the episode to illustrate checks and balances, with one teacher in Atlanta noting, "My students have never been so engaged in a lesson about the Constitution." Crockett's book deal, now finalized, became one of the most anticipated releases of the year. Titled Checks and Balances, a journey in public service, it promised to blend her personal story with an accessible explanation of constitutional principles. Publishers reported pre-orders in the tens of thousands, driven by her newfound fame. "She's not just a politician," said her editor, Lila Monroe. "She's a teacher who happens to be in Congress." The confrontation also reshaped Crockett's role in Congress. She was invited to join a bipartisan task force on judicial reform, where her expertise was sought by colleagues on both sides of the aisle. Even Republican Daniel Pierce, who had previously acknowledged her skill, approached her during a committee meeting. "Congresswoman, I still don't agree with your politics, he said with a wry smile. But I'd be a fool not to listen when you talk about the Constitution. Crockett nodded, her expression professional but warm. That's all I ask, Congressman. Let's focus on the law. Her ability to bridge divides while staying true to her principles made her a rare figure in a polarized Washington. Young activists, particularly women and people of color, saw her as a role model. A viral campaign, Crockett Inspired, encouraged young people to pursue careers in law and public service, with thousands sharing stories of how her performance had motivated them. One college student posted, "I'm applying to law school because of Jasmine Crockett. She showed me you can be fierce and fair." For Judge Judy Shineland, the confrontation was a turning point of a different kind. The episode didn't diminish her legacy. It enhanced it in unexpected ways. Her willingness to admit she'd underestimated Crockett earned her respect from viewers who had grown tired of her unyielding persona. Judy showed she's human, wrote entertainment columnist Lila Chun. That's not weakness. That's strength. Fans rallied around her, with social media posts praising her for her grace under pressure. "She's still the queen," one fan tweeted, "but she knows when to bow to a worthy opponent." Behind the scenes, Judge Judy was reflective. In a meeting with her producer, Clara Hensley, she admitted the encounter had forced her to rethink her approach. "I've spent decades being the toughest person in the room," she said, her voice tinged with introspection. "But Crockett reminded me that toughness without substance is just noise." Clara, ever loyal, nodded. "You're still the toughest, Judy. But maybe it's time to show the world a different side of you." The production team saw an opportunity. They pitched a new special, Judge Judy, Beyond the Bench, where she would interview prominent figures about leadership and accountability. The first guest? Jasmine Crockett. When Marcus Tate received the offer, he consulted with Crockett, who agreed to consider it. "I'm not here to feud," she told her team. "If Judge Judy wants to have a real conversation about public service, I'm open to it." When the special aired months later, it was a departure from Judge Judy's usual format. Instead of a courtroom, the setting was a round table, with Judy and Crockett engaging in a thoughtful discussion about power, responsibility, and the Constitution. Judy, softer but still sharp, asked probing questions, while Crockett responded with her trademark clarity. The episode drew strong ratings, with viewers noting the chemistry between the two women. "This is what discourse should look like," tweeted a political analyst. "Two strong women, disagreeing but respecting each other." The special marked a shift in Judge Judy's public image. She began incorporating more substantive discussions into her show, inviting legal scholars and public officials to weigh in on issues like judicial ethics and civic education. While she never lost her signature bite, she leaned into her role as a mentor, sharing her decades of experience with a new generation. "I'm not retiring anytime soon," she told a reporter, "but I'm learning. Crockett taught me that." The confrontation's impact rippled far beyond the two women at its center. It sparked a national conversation about civic education, with commentators noting that Crockett's clarity had exposed a gap in public understanding of the Constitution. Advocacy groups launched campaigns to promote civics in schools, citing the episode as evidence that Americans were hungry for substantive knowledge. One nonprofit, Civics for All, reported a surge in donations, with a note from a donor reading, "Inspired by Jasmine Crockett. Let's teach the next generation what she knows." The episode also changed how political media approached congressional coverage. Outlets began prioritizing stories about expertise and policy over sensationalism, with Crockett becoming a go-to figure for commentary on legal and constitutional issues. "She's not just a soundbite," said a producer at a major network. "She's the real deal, and audiences can tell." For young leaders, the confrontation offered a blueprint. Political strategists began coaching candidates to emulate Crockett's approach: prepare relentlessly, stay professional, and let the facts speak for themselves. "Crockett showed that you don't need to yell to win," said a campaign consultant. "You just need to know more than your opponent." The exchange also had a lasting impact on legal culture. The American Bar Association created a new award, the Crockett Prize, for attorneys who demonstrated excellence in public advocacy. Crockett herself was the first recipient, accepting the award with a speech that reiterated her commitment to public service. "This isn't about me," she said, holding the plaque. "It's about what we can do when we take our responsibilities seriously." Months after the episode aired, Crockett and Judge Judy crossed paths again at a legal conference in New York. The room fell silent as the two women approached each other, but the tension was gone. Judge Judy extended her hand, a genuine smile on her face. "Congresswoman, you're still keeping me on my toes," she said. Crockett laughed, shaking her hand warmly. "Your Honor, I learned from the best. You don't get to your level without knowing a thing or two." Their brief exchange, captured by a bystander's phone, went viral, symbolizing a new kind of dialogue, one where respect and accountability could coexist. The confrontation had shown that challenging authority didn't require disrespect. It required preparation, principle, and an unwavering commitment to truth. For Crockett, the episode was a defining moment, cementing her as a leader for a new generation. Her congressional work grew more influential, with colleagues relying on her expertise in high-stakes debates. She remained true to her mission, using her platform to advocate for justice and accountability, always with the Constitution as her guide. For Judge Judy, the confrontation was a reminder that even legends could learn. She continued her show with renewed purpose, blending her trademark toughness with a deeper appreciation for substance. Her legacy, already monumental, gained a new layer of complexity, proving that growth was possible at any age. The confrontation between Jasmine Crockett and Judge Judy became more than a television event. It became a touchstone for a country grappling with questions of power, respect, and responsibility. It showed that knowledge could be as powerful as authority, that preparation could outshine intimidation, and that the Constitution, when wielded by someone who understood it, could still move mountains. As classrooms, newsrooms, and living rooms continued to dissect the exchange, one thing was clear. Crockett and Judge Judy had set a new standard for public discourse. They had shown that the most effective challenges to power came not from anger or ego, but from a deep well of expertise and an unshakable commitment to doing what was right. And in doing so, they had inspired a nation to demand more of their leaders, their institutions, and themselves.